Welcome to Popternative, where we dive into topical discussions from the worlds of pop culture, social media, and sports. Here is your host, Peter Remoliotis, aka PD Beats.
Hello and welcome to the Popternative Podcast, the podcast where we have digital discussions, the worlds of social media, pop culture, TV, music, film, everything really. As always, I'm your host, Peter Remoliotis. On Twitter, you know me as PD Beats. Really excited to be joined by my guest this morning/afternoon. Well, no, it's morning for both of us. My guest is a Canadian hip-hop artist and producer. He is known as Classified. Classified, welcome to Popternative.
Thank you, man. Good to be here.
Thank you. I'm really excited to get this going. So right off the bat, kind of an icebreaker, I want to know how this all started. When did you kind of decide that music was the career path you want to take?
I don't know if it was one of those things that just happened. You know, I was like 15 years old, me and a couple friends getting into hip hop and kind of just, you know, like any band that started in high school, like, oh, you know, we're going to get into music. And it kind of went from just being a rapper to needing beats. So then I learned how to produce my own beats and stuff like that. And, you know, kind of was just a hobby till I was like 21, 22. And then I was getting laid off from a job. And that was when I was kind of like, okay, I got a year of unemployment. Let me try to turn this into a real thing, and have been going back to work since. So.
And do you think the mindset has a lot to do with it? You mentioned it started kind of as a hobby and then became a career. If you kind of go into it thinking right away you want to make a living out of it, like what do you kind of think about how people approach music in terms of it being kind of a hobby, something you do for fun, and then actually tackling it like, hey, I want to make money and do this full time?
Yeah, and it wasn't even like it was like, oh, I want to make money now. Because I think anything you chase that's just to make money, it never is going to work out. So, you know what I mean? For the first 5-6 years of doing this, it was just literally, like I said, like fun. It was a hobby. And it still is now. Like, you know what I mean? When I'm bored and I have nothing to do, I come to my studio and start playing with beats. I'm not working on a new album or anything, but this is just what I do. So it's still always been a hobby. And I find that's like the best way things come, you know, that's the best way to bring opportunity to yourself, is if you're enjoying yourself and what you're doing and you're not necessarily like, oh, I got to make money. Now, don't get me wrong. It is a job. So you do have to handle your business and do some things that you don't want to do sometimes. But more so, it was just like a hobby that I got lucky and, oh, geez, I'm making some money off this now. And okay, this can be my job for a while.
No, absolutely. And I mentioned at the beginning, you know, you were a Canadian hip-hop artist. You were a Juno Award-winning artist, for that matter, as well. You see it in a lot of your music, especially when we did O Canada. You know, you're not shy in terms of telling people that you were Canadian, you were proud to be Canadian. Talk a little bit about not only the last couple of years, the Canadian music scene, but specifically the Canadian hip-hop scene. What was it like when you first started in the Canadian hip-hop scene, Classified?
It was Canadian. It was just based in Canada. Like now with Drake, OVO, you know, things, you know, he's the biggest artist in the world, whether you're on hip hop or anything. I think Drake's the biggest artist in the world. And so that brought a lot of different eyes on Canadian hip hop. But when I came up, it was, you know, the Rascals, Choclair, Cardinal, Swollen Members, Chaos. You know, those guys were household names in Canada, but only in Canada. So it was, you know, it sucked because a lot of the rest of the world didn't know what kind of music we were making, but it was cool because it was like our own community, our own, you know, sense of pride or whatever. And, you know, for me, that's kind of where I've always toured too. I've never toured a lot outside of Canada, a little bit in Europe, a little bit in Australia, and a little bit in the States. But like, you know, Canada, we've done the national tour thing, you know, 11, 12 times. So it's really been my focus to be here. With MuchMusic coming up back in the day, like that was kind of my outlet. There was no Canadian radio playing hip hop. So, you know, my whole career was built in Canada. So I kind of just stay here and focus on here more so than anywhere.
And you mentioned MuchMusic. It's good. It's cool that you mentioned that because I was going to mention that. You know, the MuchMusic, the MMVAs, you know, an award show that you've been at many times. I mean, that was the talk of the town in those days. And music videos were a real staple in music. What do you kind of think really hit stride with the audience with the MMVAs? Was it kind of the Canadian aspect of it? Because they'd have non-Canadian, they'd have, you know, international recording artists from the world. But it was, do you find it was also popular because they did focus on it being Canadian?
Yeah, totally. Like it was, you know, even for me, like if you got a video on MuchMusic and, you know, got it in medium high rotation, Like you could literally build a small career off that back in the day. It'd be like, okay, people around the whole country know my video, my song. And these days, it wasn't like internet, YouTube, and Facebook and all that shit was big. So to see a rap video or to see anyone's music video, you had to sit down in front of the TV and watch it. And even with the award shows, you know what I mean? Back in the day, you couldn't just click on any link and be like, oh, I want to see Snoop Dogg live or see Socrates or Chocolate live. Like you had to sit around and watch the Grammys or the AMAs or the MuchMusic Video Awards or the Junos or whatever it is. So that was kind of really the only outlet for a lot of Canadian artists too. So I think that was super important.
Absolutely. No, that is important. Another thing I wanted to kind of touch on is I want to talk about collaborations. We've seen a lot of collaborations in hip hop with other artists of other genres, and they made for amazing songs. Inner Ninja that you did with David Myles is like one of my favorite songs. And I think what's really cool is you kind of have the two different genres kind of working together as kind of like a wrestling tag team, so to speak. So what do you kind of think about collaborations, and talk a little bit about that collaboration specifically with David Myles?
Yeah, I like collaborating because it's fun. You know what I mean? Like, look around my studio. It's usually me by myself in here doing my thing. So it's, when I'm getting to work with other artists, it's kind of like a day off for me. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, so-and-so's coming over here with Dave. I think me and Dave get along so well, even though our music and even our lifestyles are so different, is because we kind of both grew up on 90s hip hop. He grew up on a lot of that old Far Side stuff that I grew up on. But our work and our excitement to make music, like Dave was here last week and we were working on a new song for him. And it's like, we can sit here for 7-8 hours and be just excited when we started the song and we're trying stuff. And we're both very open to kind of like, oh, let's try this and just see what happens. And I think that's why it works so good. But at the same time, that's why it's fun for me to work with someone like that. And you learn stuff.
No, absolutely. But specifically what I like about that song, too, is it starts off, before your verse comes in, he's doing his thing, doing like a little bit. I don't know if that's like the chord. That's like the pre-chorus, I guess, of the song. And then what I like about it, too, is the choir, like the kids singing in that song really make it pop, I find.
Yeah, and that was like a last minute decision. Like before, it was always just Dave singing that part, and then one of us came up with the idea. It's like, yo, let's get some kids to sing this shit. And boom, got the kids to sing, and they kind of just took it to another level. I also think that's why the song was such a big hit on radio. Is, a lot of kids listen to radio, and I find when kids hear kids sing, it interests them in a weird way.
No, absolutely. But you've had a lot of other songs too. That ain't classy. I enjoy, like, one of my favorites too is Payday. I just love the samples in that song. You know what I mean? And I think it's important. But I is it safe to say that Classify is kind of like you're not afraid to kind of push the envelope and kind of like experiment a little bit? Because I feel like that kind of attributes a little bit to your success, right? You're not afraid to try different things.
No, like I said, I grew up on hip hop, but I also grew up on pop music from my dad's band playing cover, Beatles songs. So like, I like melody, I like songs. So it's, I'm older now too. When I was 20, 23, 24, and I was like, yo, I can't do this because it's not hip hop. And
no, absolutely. You mentioned the like changing it up is important, coming from the different backgrounds. What are some, because what I find really interesting is I've interviewed a lot of artists on the show, heavy metal artists, and then indie and pop punk, and I find it's different because you listen to a lot of the bands that make heavy music. When they're not making heavy music, they're not listening to heavy music. They're listening to soft music. They're listening to country, indie. But then the other way around, people that do indie music or folk, they listen to a lot of heavy music. I was talking to like an indie artist, and she was saying she listens to Slayer and Meshuggah and all that. So I find it interesting. So what were you listening to growing up besides hip hop?
Honestly, like between 15 and 25, hip hop. That's it.
Yeah.
Like, once I kind of fell into it, it was like every artist that put out a record, I'd go check it, whether it's East Coast, West Coast, whatever it is. Like, it was just taking it all in. And it was a lot of going back and learning shit that I didn't know before. But being, up to that age, just being a young teenager, a young kid, it was like whatever the hell was on the radio was kind of what I was listening to. So, you get the pop songs, stuff like that. But then my dad was in a band, so his band always practiced in our house. So they would be always covering old Beatles, Burton Cummings, old 70s rock and roll type stuff. So I kind of grew up hearing that. I just remember going to sleep every night hearing certain songs and, when the band was practicing. So a lot of different stuff. But, when it was just me kind of really getting into music, it was all hip hop. A little bit of Red Hot Chili Peppers, a couple things like that. But it was more so just hip hop. And then when I got into producing, that's when I went back to like the old jazz, old soul records and like going through those, looking for samples and stuff.
They often talk about, artists and, producers as well, often talk about kind of climactic, groundbreaking kind of moments of their life and their career. What has that stood out for you, whether it's been on the road or in the recording studio, in terms of cool moments or cool collaborations that you've been a part of that you were kind of like, yeah, this is awesome, this is cool, this is what it's all about? Have there been any kind of groundbreaking moments like that come to mind?
Every single one of them. Like for me, obviously doing the song with Snoop Dogg, because like I said, I grew up as a 90s kid. Snoop was that guy when I grew up. So being able to get in the studio with him and mess around on a song and him putting his verse down, doing his ad libs and shouting classified out, like that shit was surreal for me. You know what I mean? Royce the 5'9", I did a couple tracks with him who I consider still like the best lyricist maybe ever in hip hop. You know what I mean? I've got to work with him. I got to tour with him a couple times. So, you know what I mean? There's not like one big thing that stands out like, oh, that was the one. It was groundbreaking. It changed everything for me. But it is like a culmination of, small things that kind of added it all up and kind of makes sense.
So when you first started, I wanted to it was a good segue to MuchMusic, but what I really want, when you talked about, the Canadian hip hop scene, the one thing I wanted to kind of talk about was when I did my at Carleton University, I did my minor in music, and I did a lot of music classes, and one of the classes we did was Canadian music, Canadian popular music, and it's kind of like a class where you kind of go through the timeline of different genres. So when they go through hip hop, they talk about, Choclair, Cardinal Official, Rascals, like all those artists you mentioned, and they talk about the newer artists that have kind of emerged and have become big. You were one of them. So we studied you in class. How does that, when you hear things like that, it must feel kind of cool, right?
Man. Like the fact that I still live off of rap music blows my mind. You know what I mean? Like I'm 40 years old. I grew up in a small town where it was like me and 3 friends that listened to hip hop. And I still live here, still work out of my studio and do the same shit I was doing since I was 19, So it's a blessing. It's weird sometimes when I think about it. It's like, how did this happen? But going back to the first conversation that we had of this just being a hobby, something I like doing. And, eventually it turned me from doing shows at my school, at the variety show or whatever, at the school dance, I'd rap at the end of songs, to, playing to 2,000 people in Toronto every tour. Like it's weird how it came to be, but I think just the way that it was such a gradual climb that it never really shocked me like, oh shit, I'm here, I did it. And I think that's a blessing too, is because I learned a lot of the industry. I learned not to take none of this shit for granted, because I've seen so many artists come up, blow up like they're the next big thing, and next year they're gone. And I've been really, lucky that I've been making a slow climb to where I got to, that it kind of prepared me for it.
No, for sure. That's really important. Another thing I want to talk about as well is the relation. There's a very strong relationship between music and sports. I've always felt like that, and that's one thing I wanted to kind of mention. How important is the relationship and the bond between sports and music, Classified?
I don't know. I played hockey growing up. You know what I mean? For like just a sports person, music hypes you up. Music's a mood, so. Whether it's the warm up in the game or when you're practicing, just to have music in your headphones or whatever it is, I think it's always an important, that thing that way. The opposite way, like how is sports important to music? I don't know. Well,
I mean, I find it interesting. I personally think, this is a bit dumb. It's just more my alley. Yeah. Like, but I think it's, you hear, when Michael Phelps, broke all those records in the Olympics for swimming, they asked him what got him through that. And he says, listening to like Lil Wayne and Future, that's what got it done. Right. So I find art, like a lot of athletes kind of, use like.
No, I get that totally. Like on the athlete side of like, hype up practice and stuff. But on the opposite side of, because most music artists do not play sports.
But they like sports. That's what I'm noticing.
And in especially hip hop, the amount of references to basketball, football, any sport. You know what I mean? It's there very.
Well, look at Sheck West's song, the Mo Bamba song, man.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like Mo Bamba must be like, this is nuts. Like this song is on the radio all the time, and I just started my NBA career.
And he hears the shit. Yeah, no. Like it's definitely, especially in the rap world, the hip hop world. Like I find that references sports a lot. But I find like most indie rock bands I know and shit like that, it's like that's the farthest thing.
So what I found, it's funny because I got to give them a shout out. So my buddies Pat and Rob, they played in a band that you're probably familiar with that you kind of saw at maybe the Junos or the MMVAs. They used to be in Stereos. Do you remember Stereos? Yeah. So they're not. They're doing
win like what didn't they win a competition like Pop Stars?
Yeah. So they were on Disband.
Yeah,
on MuchMusic, yeah.
Yeah, I remember that shit.
What they're doing now is they have a new band called In All Alone, and it's kind of like, it's interesting because it's like a pop punk band with like a hockey theme. Like their name is In All Alone because it's a breakaway, right? And then all their songs have hockey. Like that. That's kind of like, that's why I was just curious because I just find that there's some bands now that are really kind of, like you said, in hip hop too, kind of using the music, the sports aspect in their songs and in their shtick, so to speak.
Totally. Like Post Malone's first hit song was called White Iverson. You know
yes,
so,
I remember that.
Iverson. Yeah, so like,
he has so many, dude.
There's a lot of connections.
It's funny because you mentioned Drake too, eh? And then you mentioned like a lot of those hip hop artists. Same with you too. Like you guys like pump out a lot of songs, right? So it's really hard to keep up, I find.
Yeah. Oh, I got kids too, man, so I'm not keeping up on shit no more.
No, but I find if people looked at what you have put out and the songs and the singles and songs you've featured on, like you put out a lot of music. Mm-hmm. It's hard for people to, and it's one of those things where you say you've been doing it for a good amount of time right now. There's going to be moments where people are going to hear your new song and then say, oh, Classified, they put a new track on. I remember listening to some songs. I forget the names, but like, let me go back. So do you kind of find that interesting that like the new songs kind of tag team with the old songs? Because once you put a new track out, maybe that's going to get people pumped to kind of go back and listen to your older stuff as well. Have you ever thought about that?
Oh, yeah, all the time. Like, I think just putting out new music, especially with streaming now, like it's all there. So it's like, you go hear someone's song, go to the rest of their Spotify page, and you go, shit, this guy's got 16 albums. Let's start the day and just see where it goes. So, that's the benefit of the streaming world. Like a lot of people complain about that, but that's a big bonus. Like even a song I put out in 1999, we pressed 500 copies. It was called It Ain't Over, sampled Crowded House, the Hey Now, Don't Dream It's Over. Mm-hmm. We sold 500 copies of that shit. I went on Spotify the other day. There's 1 million streams now. You know what I mean? So, like, that's the cool thing about that. It brings people back to your old music.
No, absolutely. We'll wrap up, but I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the show, man. And thank you for being an important figure in Canadian hip-hop, man. Seriously.
Appreciate that, man. Thank you.
No problem. But before we wrap up, I always ask, what kind of advice would you have quickly to, upcoming artists or specifically hip hop artists, from your past experiences that you can kind of give them? Any advice about like how to make music, where to start, anything like that?
Write songs about sports. Think the word. No, but even like, I'm real though, like the internet, social media, all that shit is so, the way to get your shit out there now. Mm-hmm. But don't forget there's real life. Like do shows, get out and do shows. Like to me, that's how you make real fans that will come back and check your shit. There's 1 million people that will click on one song on the internet, and when it's over, they kind of go on and don't care about that artist. But get out and do shows. That's the real thing. And that's how you make money nowadays, man.
Oh, absolutely. Where can people follow you on social media? Where are the handles?
Classified Hip Hop is my Facebook. Just @Classified is my Twitter, and Classified Hip Hop on Instagram.
Perfect, man. Well, thank you so much, and hopefully we can have you on again soon, man. This was fun.
Yeah, bud. Thanks again.
No problem. Well, this has been Popternative, youtube.com/Popternative for previous episodes. And until next time, this is Classified and PD Beats signing off.
Thank you for tuning in to Popternative. Make sure to check out our past episodes of Popternative on YouTube. Be sure to like Popternative on Facebook and follow us on Twitter.
This has been an Autograph Communications production.